Okay, so this question is about looking at a graph and finding out the equation that it represents. Okay, and so you can see this one is talking about sine and cosine graphs, and of course, that kind of clue might not be given to you on the test, but you should be basically familiar with the graphs of sine and cosine. One thing that I note is that the sine graph, without shifting left or right, usually goes right through the origin. It goes through the origin, okay? And then the cosine graph would start at whatever the max amplitude is, okay? So that's kind of how you can tell the difference between them. Again, that's without considering any shifting left or right. So just looking at this graph, I would think that this is a cosine graph because it starts up at the top. Okay, we can also measure the amplitude, which is the maximum distance from the center of the function. So again, this one seems to be centered across the x-axis, and you can see we can go up 1, 2, 3, 4, or you could go down 1, 2, 3, 4. So the amplitude is going to be 4, and you can already see that someone's entered that for the amplitude. But the question that I got was about how do we determine the period? How do we figure that out? So for cosine and sine, period, let me make this a little bit bigger, is 2 pi over b. And in this case, and I'm gonna make that a capital B, just to be clear. In this case, like I said, we're trying to come up with the function, so we're trying to figure out what this B value is. We can look at the graph to determine what the period is. To determine the period, we need to pick a starting point. It doesn't matter what you pick, just pick a starting point. 0 is usually convenient, but not always. And we want to know, how far do we have to go before this thing starts to repeat? Okay. And so that's the whole graph, right? It starts here at the maximum value, it comes down to the lower value, and then it goes back to the maximum value and it starts to repeat. So the period is from 0 to pi, or in this case, it's just pi. Just to be clear, we could have started here at, this is probably minus 3 pi over 4. And so if I started here, I would say, okay, we start at the axis, we go down, we go all the way up, we come back to the axis, and it starts to repeat, right? So this thing ends at pi over 4. It started at negative 3 pi over 4. So the distance between those is pi. Okay, so I can say pi is equal to 2 pi over b. And what I want to do is solve for b, right? And so we could flip both sides, or I'm going to multiply both sides by b. That's what I'll do. So we get b times pi equals 2 pi. And then if I divide both sides by pi, we get b is equal to 2. And that's what we would put on the x coefficient in our equation.